Talk to me about the idea of Kyle Shanahan being pressured into taking Trey Lance. What does that look like, and who would have the voice to pressure Kyle Shanahan into a move like that?
First of all, this is not an Allen Styles take, right? Everybody,
Thank you for third person.
We've all read different pieces and articles about this. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory, but just the idea that Trey wasn't Kyle's guy. When you look at the rest of the team, when you look at the work that that Trey would need, or Trey does need, it doesn't really make any sense. The pick did not make sense, right? So when I hear that and when I've read that from different pieces, I personally believe it because a Mac Jones is somebody that we've seen Kyle Shanahan like in the past. So when I said this, obviously the first question that comes up is, well, what about RG3? Well, I have no clue. Kyle Shanahan is a coordinator in Washington. I have no clue if Kyle Shanahan wanted RG3, right? The fact that he had success with RG3, we know that Kyle Shanahan is a talented play caller and it's an offensive genius. That has nothing to do with whether Kyle Shanahan, if he were to pick a quarterback, if he were to make a go on to Madden and make his perfect quarterback, if he would pick somebody like a RG3 or somebody like a Matt Ryan or somebody like a Kirk Cousins. So when I look at the collection of Kyle Shanahan quarterbacks, besides RG3, who, like I said, I don't know, hey, we need him. RG3 lit it up at Baylor. They didn't really have a choice. That dude had the world on fire. It was him and Andrew Luck. We know that.
But to your point, they also drafted Kirk Cousins that same year.
Exactly. So that's just what I'm looking at. And now when you have Trey and how he is different from that style of quarterback, it is no surprise to me that we are in this situation where there are question marks. So whether somebody is reporting and there is a pro Brock twinge or a pro Trey twinge, it doesn't matter to me because it's Kyle Shanahan's decision. And it's a decision that is already made. I don't need to know that Brock was better than Trey. You want to know why, Dibs? Because Trey could be better than Brock for the rest of camp. It doesn't matter. Brock is starting.
Right.
Brock is starting. Brock could have a bad INT, a good INT, a semi-INT, a super INT, anything. It doesn't matter. This is Brock's team.
Yes.
This is Brock's team, okay?
The job's been decided.
The job has been decided.
The job is not up for grabs.
The only chance that Trey Lance had was if for some reason Brock took too long to come back, Trey got in there, set the world on fire, went Super Saiyan, and people thought, wow, I don't know about this. And you still would have needed about 2 games, maybe 3 games of that. It was never possible. Never. So I don't know why everybody gets all worked up about, well, talk about Trey. It doesn't matter. We've never cared about training camp stuff. Brock did it in real time. Brock did it in the games.
Yes. And now to me, it's more a question of Trey versus Sam Darnold in competing for the backup spot. I think that
Give me those stats.
When they were looking at Trey Lance, I think they saw a chance to take a guy with more upside, knowing that they had Jimmy Garoppolo for at least one more year, and they figured Kyle thought with his brain and his laminated play sheet and everything that he knows about football and quarterbacks that I could take this guy like a big 6'3" mound of clay and turn him into the kind of quarterback that I haven't ever had. And RG3 was a good runner, and he was a good thrower, but he had already had an ACL at Baylor, and he never developed into the passer that they would have wanted him to be in Washington, and so they ran him the way they ran him, and he got hurt again, and his career was over before it started. So I think he looked at Trey Lance and thought, give me a year with this guy. I don't need to play him at all. I can ride with Jimmy Garoppolo. I know that Jimmy Garoppolo is a solid B as a quarterback. At times he's a B+. At times, he's a B-. He's usually not a C, a D, or an F, and he's almost never an A.
3.0.
But yeah, exactly. Jimmy Garoppolo is a solid, you might get into a couple of UCs. You're definitely going to any state school you want.
Shout out Santa Barbara.
Kind of a guy. Yeah, that's where my son goes now. He's a junior at UCSB. He was much higher. Nowadays, you can't, with a 3.0, you'd be lucky to get into a state school.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more competitive now.
UCs, they hold it down. You can't mess around with UCs.
UC's brutal now. It's tough to get into a UC. But I digest, as we like to say. So I think he looked at Trey Lance and thought, give me a year with this guy, and I can take him from where he is to where he needs to be. And he had the finger injury. And then last year he had the broken ankle. And so now he's really He's not at square one, but he's at probably square two, and you would want him at square 11 in order to give him the job, and then Brock balled out, and so now Trey's kind of stuck in that purgatory.
I've never heard Kyle Shanahan call Trey Lance the real deal. Okay, everything about Trey Lance is he's a good dude, right? Trey Lance has basically been friend zoned. You ever get friend zoned? You're a really good person.
That was my whole life.
You're a really good person. All right, Trey.
For me, it was you're so funny and you're so funny, cute. Funny and cute. Allen were my curses.
Somebody's gonna be so lucky. It ain't gonna be me,
dude.
But somebody.
I was the mayor of the friend zone.
I hear what you're saying, Dibs, but I just don't necessarily buy it because he gets into the building. And again, these are articles that have come out. Oh, well, they thought he'd be, what did they I don't know if they necessarily said faster, but they thought he'd be a more electric runner, right? And I get it, 2020, you're still pandemic. I thought there was still plenty of film, but, they thought, so he gets in the building, I thought he'd be a little bit faster. He gets in the building, he kind of does that kind of weird hitch with his throw.
He does?
So none of that.
He did anyway.
He did. So none of that necessarily sounds like a Kyle Shanahan. It just doesn't add up to me. Kyle Shanahan's more calculated than that, right? To pick somebody who, I thought he was. It just seemed like they were shooting from the hip. I thought he'd be faster, huh? That's crazy. We gave up these picks and.
Well, you saw him against FCS competition. You didn't see him against FBS.
Exactly, and that
Mark
matters.
And I went through this last week, and I could pull up the stats again on Mac Jones, but it would blow your mind the numbers that he put up at Alabama. I think it was 78% completion percentage.
And
his numbers were off the charts.
And think about Alabama. What do they have?
The weapons they had were off. They were crazy.
So we've already seen, okay, cool. He knows how to not mess it up. And that's kind of all we need.
When you have an elite offensive line and the 4 best receivers in the country, yes, you're going to look good at quarterback. Trey Lance didn't have that, but what he did have was a monster year running the ball, but against FCS competition. So you couldn't get a real accurate gauge like Brock Purdy. You saw him for 4 years at Iowa State. You saw his greatness. You saw his warts, but you saw the guy start about 50 games at D1, not having a great offensive line and not having a bunch of elite weapons. And you saw him as he is. And so you had a better gauge, I think, of Brock Purdy than you would have of Trey Lance.
Well, exactly. And my guy and who I wanted the Niners to pick was Justin Fields. Missing on a pick, we know ultimately this is a gamble. Missing on a pick is not the worst thing in the world. It stinks, but it happens, right? Shout out Jamarcus Russell. It happens. But missing on a pick that doesn't make sense is worse. If Justin Fields ends up not being able to pan out, and everybody thinks he's going to take a big leap this year, we don't know. I'm a Justin Fields fan, so I hope so. They've got some weapons for him. But if you took Justin Fields and it didn't make sense and it didn't work out, it did make sense but didn't work out. Okay, well, we saw him at Ohio State and he was a stud. We saw him do things at the highest level and it just didn't work out. Too bad, so sad, but it made sense. You give up those picks for a project when your team is ready for a Super Bowl.
But that's why I think you did it because you had Jimmy Garoppolo. And Jimmy Garoppolo was your one in the hand.
They overshot their ability to mold Clay into what they wanted. And I guess injuries didn't help, sure.
Right. Well, I don't think that his race has been run. And I don't think that it's necessarily a done deal. But
it ain't going to get run here.
Well, it might. And it just depends on how it plays out because you've got a chance to pick up his 5th-year option at the end of this year.
Right.
So you could keep Trey as QB2 this year and Sam as your QB3.
Sam's cooking.
You could keep Sam as QB2 and keep Trey as QB3, which I think really hinders Trey's ability to be traded at that point. But then you could at least say to Trey, we want to develop you for one more year. And I know that QB3 doesn't get a lot of reps. QB2 doesn't get many reps during the course of a regular season. So Trey's not going to have the ability really to go out and get better if he's QB2 or QB3.
Yeah.
But do you really want to give up on this asset unless you are convinced as a 49er organization that he's not going to be the guy?
I'm not saying to give up on them. I'm saying they're in a very tough spot. They're in a good spot, right? This isn't a negative, and that's how a lot of people.
Well, they're in a good spot because they hit on Brock Purdy.
Exactly. That saved their butts, right? So you got Brock Purdy, and you got Sam Darnold, who again, Sam Darnold could be, and I'm just thinking about this right now. Sam Darnold could honestly be and I don't want to get ahead of myself. Don't get too mad at me, Dibs, right? An Andrew Wiggins type situation with the Niners, because this would be the most weapons he's ever had.
Back to Wiggins.
Right? And we're not asking him to be what people thought he'd be when he got drafted 3rd overall. Come in, and now I'm just not thinking about Trey right now. Come in, if Brock gets injured or whatever the case is, just run the offense. You got some arm talent. You can take some chances. We're not asking you to be a world beater. We're not asking you to be Superman. So that's what I see in Sam Darnold. But in terms of Trey Lance and now how he's perceived, there have been reports about the Falcons maybe kicking the tires because they got Desmond Ridder, and what the heck is that? So there are teams that will be interested, but out of sight, out of mind. I mean, Dib, let's be honest. Every year in college, the way the college game is continuing to replicate and mirror the NFL, every year you're pumping out new QBs that are cheap, right? So why are we going to go with this Trey Lance guy who is old news? He's old. I don't even know how many people think about Trey Lance nationally anymore.
Well, I don't know if he's necessarily old news yet. He is certainly out of the eye of the NFL, spectacle, because he hasn't played. He only played a little bit, had the finger injury, and then last year he played a game and a quarter and then broke his ankle. And so now it's an interesting spot nationally. But if you're a team that loses a quarterback and you're looking to find a quarterback, he's going to suddenly percolate back to the top of the news cycle because he's a guy who I don't think you can look at him and say he's done or that you even really know what he can be. He's only played 3.5 games, basically, and he's shown some flashes. He's shown some struggles.